Restitution Road by Marc Everitt. Narrated by Fria. Prologue. Exordium of Terminus. 2nd July 1916. La Boisselle, northern France. The men of the 11th Battalion, Cheshire Regiment, had lived through hell in the previous 24 hours. The whistle had sounded at 7:30 a.m., and the soldiers had climbed out of the trenches that had been their homes for weeks, and then walked slowly across the fields towards the enemy positions. All had been scared, but most had been confident that the German numbers had been severely depleted by the days of bombardment from the Allied artillery, and that they were now merely mopping up the remains of the enemy force. The British officers, in consultation with their Allied compatriots, were confident that 60 to 80% of the German troops would have been rendered ineffective by the shelling, and this had been relayed to the men of the 11th Battalion, as well as the dozens of other battalions across this part of the Western Front. The machine gun fire had not commenced straight away, and survivors would look back and wonder if this was due to the Germans waiting for the British to walk closer, or just that they couldn't believe their enemies were presenting such an easy target. Of the 12,000 tons of artillery fired at the German entrenchments over the past days, 2/3 of it was shrapnel, and only 900 tons of it was capable of penetrating the bunkers. Less than 4% of the German military force had been killed by the bombardment, and the rest were sat waiting for the enemy to advance. When the gunfire did start, however, it was deafening and lethal. Bodies had fallen in such numbers the ground was stained red with blood in less than a minute. Soldiers had to climb over the dying bodies of friends and brothers to continue their advance, before being hit in the back as they tried to return to their trenches, human nature winning out over military discipline. The stench of death was already hanging over the fields of the Somme by 9:30, and the British Army kept advancing until a little after 4 p.m. Those that survived to return to England would later learn that 54,470 casualties had been suffered by the British Army on the 1st July 1916, including a stunning 19,240 men killed that day, by far the bloodiest day in the history of the British Army. The men of 11th Battalion knew nothing of this earlier as they sat in the cold, thick mud, waiting for the dawn, and the call to climb the ladders and walk once again from the purgatory of the trenches to the hell of no man's land, advancing on the German guns. All these men knew was that each of them had lost almost all of the friends they had joined up with in a few confusing, terrifying moments. There were barely any officers left, thanks to the regrettable decision for the officers to dress distinctly different from the enlisted men, combined with the fact that the German machine gunners had been trained to know exactly who to aim for. Those officers that were still alive were shouting encouragement to the men, trying to instill a sense of purpose into them that they themselves did not feel. One of these officers, a lieutenant who had just turned 24 years old, was walking through a particularly unpleasant section of the trench, carrying medical supplies to help one of his men, who had been shot in the shoulder the previous day. The officer knew this man was one of the lucky ones, and he was now unable to carry a weapon and would shortly be shipped back to the medical facilities in the nearby town of Montauban, several miles away from their front-line position. Word was just coming through that the next push may be delayed until the following day, but this had not raised the morale of the shell-shocked, traumatized men cowering in the trench. As the officer neared the injured man, he passed a private, shaking and rocking forward and backward in the mud, with
Sample complete. Ready to continue?